Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. The room buzzed with nervous excitement as the final preparations for the ceremony unfolded. But behind a slightly ajar door, I froze, my breath caught when I heard him, my future son-in-law, laugh cruelly and say, "I mean, she's sweet, but God, that body? I'm doing charity work marrying her." His voice, laced with mockery, was followed by a burst of laughter from his groomsmen, each chuckle like a slap across my face. My ears rang with disbelief as I realized the venom behind his charming mask. He had always seemed so kind, so attentive, and yet here he was tearing my daughter apart like she was some joke. I stood still, my entire world tilting in silence, while the weight of his words crashed over me like a wave I couldn't escape. I stayed frozen in place, my hand still gripping the polished doorknob as if letting go would make the moment real. Through the thin wood, their laughter kept echoing, unaware that I, the bride's mother, was standing just inches away, listening to them tear her down like she was nothing. I looked around and saw the rest of the guests, smiling, laughing, dressed in their finest, completely oblivious to the cruelty happening just feet from the altar. My heart cracked slowly, painfully, not just because of what he said, but because I had believed in him. I had welcomed him into our family, trusted him with my daughter's joy. The illusion I had built of their love, of their future, shattered like glass, and I was left holding the shards. In that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong, something we had all failed to see. The sorrow dissolved into fury almost instantly, burning in my chest with a heat I hadn't felt in years. I had raised my daughter through heartbreak and hardships, taught her to believe in herself, to love fiercely, and now this man, this coward, dared reduce her to an object of ridicule? No, not today. I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding in my ears, and fought the urge to storm in and slap that smug smile off his face. He thought he was clever, hidden behind charm and tuxedos, but he hadn't counted on a mother's fire. I had given that girl everything, sleepless nights, unwavering support, every ounce of strength I had. And he thought he could break her with a joke? I would not let him. I didn't care if the church was full or if the cameras were rolling. He would answer to me. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into the room with a smile so tight it could cut glass. My hands trembled as I walked in, but I kept them at my sides, steady and graceful, pretending I had heard nothing. The moment I entered, their laughter stopped cold, his especially, and the silence that followed was suffocating. My eyes met his, and I saw a flicker of panic behind his polished exterior, but I acted as if everything was normal. My voice came out calm, too calm, as I asked if they were ready. I could feel the tension in the air, feel the judgment in my own bones, but I played my part. Because today wasn't about me, it was her day, and I wouldn't let him ruin it. Not yet. The second our eyes locked, he paled as if death itself had walked into the room, his skin draining of color like a man caught naked in front of a crowd. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came, only a dry, stammering breath. He knew. He knew I had heard every word, that I had seen the truth behind his rehearsed kindness. The men around him shifted uncomfortably, looking between us, sensing something had shifted but unsure of what. I didn't break eye contact, not even for a second. I needed him to feel it, that I saw him now, really saw him, and there would be no pretending from this point on. He had insulted my daughter in secret, but now he would live in fear of what I would do next. As I walked out of the room and down the hall toward the church doors, my heart pounded with indecision. Should I stop the wedding? Should I pull my daughter aside and tell her everything, crush her joy before she even walked down the aisle? Or should I protect her peace, let her have this moment of happiness, even if it was built on a lie? The weight of it nearly brought me to my knees. If I said nothing, I was complicit, letting her marry a man who saw her as less than. But if I told her, I risked breaking her spirit, humiliating her in front of everyone she loved. The stakes were too high either way. And yet, time was running out and the music was already starting. She appeared at the church entrance like a vision, my daughter glowing radiant, dressed in ivory and lace with a smile so pure it made my chest ache. The doors opened wide and everyone rose to their feet, gasping softly at her beauty, her grace, her innocence. I watched her clutch her bouquet with trembling hands, eyes locked on the man waiting at the altar, the man who had just called her disgusting. And still she looked at him with such open love, with trust, with hope. The room held its breath and I held mine, silently screaming behind my composed face. She deserved a lifetime of happiness, not a cage disguised as marriage. And yet there she was walking straight into it. Each step she took down the aisle was a blade to my heart, and I hated myself for staying silent. I had promised to protect her since the day she was born, and now I was betraying that promise with every second that passed. I smiled at the guests, nodded at the priest, played the proud mother, while inside I was screaming. What kind of mother lets her daughter walk into a lie? What kind of love is silence? The guilt clawed at me, ruthless and sharp, and still I did nothing. Because in that moment I didn't know what would hurt her more, the truth or the illusion. All around me, people murmured about how perfect they looked, how lucky she was, how beautiful the ceremony had turned out. Every whispered compliment felt like poison, because I knew the truth they didn't. I saw his fake smile, his stiff posture, the way he avoided her eyes when he thought no one was looking. I saw her joy, her love, her trust, and I knew it was all about to be destroyed. I wanted to stand up and scream that it was all a lie, that the groom didn't deserve her. But I stayed quiet, trapped between protecting her happiness and revealing the truth that would devastate her. The wind rustled the petals on the ground like an omen, soft but full of warning. When it was time for the vows, he took her hands in his and began to speak, his voice smooth but just slightly off. There was a tremble in his tone, a hesitation in his words, subtle, but I caught it. He promised to love her, to cherish her, to honor her above all else, and I almost laughed. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. How could someone lie so easily while looking into her eyes? She smiled through tears, believing every word, and I watched her fall deeper into a dream that would soon become a nightmare. I could hardly breathe as the priest blessed the union, sealing a vow built on deceit. The music started softly, a romantic ballad chosen months ago, and the newlyweds stepped onto the polished floor, swaying in each other's arms as the crowd watched with tender smiles. My daughter looked up at him with the kind of love only the pure-hearted can give, her cheeks flushed with joy, completely unaware of the darkness behind his charm. But I saw it. I saw the way his eyes drifted, cold, detached, gazing past her shoulder directly at me with an expression that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't guilt anymore, it was a warning, a silent message that said, "Don't interfere." And yet, she clung to him like he was the answer to every prayer, while I stood in the shadows, dying a little with every beat of that cursed song. As they danced, I heard my late husband's voice echo in my mind, a memory from years ago when our daughter was still in pigtails. Never let anyone break her spirit, not even someone who claims to love her. He had been fierce in his love for her, protective in ways I often found too harsh, but now I understood. He had seen the world's cruelty before I ever wanted to believe it existed. That voice returned like a whisper laced in urgency, grounding me in the moment, reminding me that silence was dangerous. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder, guiding me, urging me to do what he no longer could. The promise we made as parents wasn't meant to end at the altar, and now I was the only one left to keep it. He raised his glass high, flashing his perfect smile as he toasted to forever, his words laced with confidence and performative charm that fooled the entire room. Laughter followed every sentence he spoke, the guests enchanted by his clever anecdotes and sweet compliments, completely blind to the venom behind the mask. My daughter beamed, eyes glassy with love and champagne, while I sat frozen, watching this performance unfold like a twisted play. He spoke of their future, children, travels, building dreams together, as if he actually meant them. But I knew now that every word was a lie. And the worst part was he was good at it. So good even I had been fooled until today. That night, as the last guests waved goodbye and the lights of the hall dimmed, I knew I couldn't confront him, not yet. There was too much at stake, too much she didn't see, and one wrong move could push her further into his control. So I chose to wait. I would smile when needed, play the doting mother-in-law, and use that mask to hide my true mission. I would watch everything, listen to every word, read between every line. If he was going to destroy her, he'd have to get past me first. And I had just begun collecting the truth. The next morning, I hugged her tighter than I ever had before, breathing in the scent of her hair like it might be the last time. She was glowing with excitement, telling me about their trip to Greece, showing me her carefully packed suitcase, completely unaware of what I now knew. He stood behind her, hand on her lower back, grinning with that same smug ease, but his eyes flicked toward me, challenging as if daring me to act. I kissed her cheek, told her I loved her, and forced a smile I didn't feel. As their car drove away, she waved through the window, still full of dreams. And I stood alone in the driveway, cold and terrified, haunted by the sound of his voice from behind that door. In the days that followed, I heard from her only in brief texts and cheerful calls, filled with updates about beaches, wine, and sunsets. She was happy, or at least that's what she wanted me to believe. Each message sounded rehearsed, too perfect, as if she were trying to convince herself as much as me. I listened closely for cracks in her voice, but she never let one slip. And he didn't speak to me at all. That silence from his end was more revealing than any insult. It wasn't just distance, it was control. We had planned to meet for lunch once she returned, a simple tradition between us after any trip, but the night before she canceled. "He's not really in the mood to go out," she said gently, almost apologetically. I asked why he had to come at all, and there was a pause, too long, too telling, before she replied, "I just don't want to leave him alone today." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. That wasn't my daughter's voice. It was someone trying not to upset someone else. And I knew then, he wasn't just possessive. He was starting to isolate her. It began slowly, almost invisibly, just missed calls, forgotten plans, excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface. "She's busy," her friends told me. "They're nesting," her coworkers assumed. But I knew better. Bit by bit, he was cutting her off, planting the idea that she didn't need anyone but him. I watched as her world shrank, her social media went quiet, and the people she once leaned on faded into silence. He was shaping her life into a private cage, and she didn't even see the bars closing around her. It was nearly midnight when my phone rang, her name lighting up the screen like a lifeline. Her voice was soft, hesitant, trembling as she asked, "Mom, do you think I've gained weight?" The question alone crushed me. My daughter had never cared about those things. She had always been confident, radiant, unapologetic in her body. I told her she was beautiful, always had been, always would be. There was a silence, and then a soft, broken laugh that didn't sound like her. "He just worries I might let myself go," she whispered. I closed my eyes, every word slicing deeper. He was breaking her from the inside out. As weeks passed, I began noticing changes in how she spoke, apologies for having opinions, doubt in her tone when she talked about her passions. She had once dreamed of opening her own business, of traveling, of writing. Now she dismissed those dreams with a shrug. "He says it's just not realistic," she explained, "and maybe he's right." My throat tightened every time she defended him, repeating his cruel assessments as if they were truths. He didn't just insult her, he made her believe she deserved it. And still, she clung to his love like it was the only thing keeping her alive. The first time I saw it, I almost convinced myself it was nothing. A faint purple mark on her wrist, half hidden under a sleeve she quickly tugged down when I noticed. "I'm just clumsy," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes, brushing it off as if it meant nothing. But my gut twisted. I knew my daughter's body language too well to believe that lie. She avoided my gaze, changed the subject too quickly, and suddenly had a dozen new reasons why they couldn't meet as often. I wanted to press her, to force the truth out of her, but fear held me back. If I pushed too hard, she might pull away completely. And so I swallowed my panic and left that day with a smile plastered over my breaking heart. Weeks later, I insisted on visiting their apartment, needing to see for myself what was happening behind closed doors. Everything looked perfect, too perfect. The furniture was spotless, the kitchen gleamed. The scent of fresh flowers floated through the air, and she floated through rooms with a rehearsed smile. But the perfection felt staged. A mask stretched tight over something rotten beneath. He greeted me politely, even warmly, as if we were friends, offering coffee and talking about plans for the future. And yet, every word felt rehearsed, every movement calculated. I left that day with an unsettling certainty. Whatever pain she was hiding, it was happening in the silence between their smiles. On my way out, I paused by the hallway, frozen by the sound of his voice drifting from behind their bedroom door. "Useless," he hissed. "You can't do anything right. You disgust me." My stomach flipped as I pressed closer, my hands trembling. Her voice followed, soft, broken, apologetic, pleading for forgiveness for something I couldn't even make out. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from storming in and tearing the door off its hinges. That was the first time I heard the cruelty without disguises, the man behind the charming facade revealed in full. It wasn't teasing or carelessness. It was hatred, and it was intentional. And now I knew for sure. My daughter was living with a monster. When I walked back into the room, she was there waiting for me, smiling like nothing was wrong, though her eyes told a story too painful for words. I pulled her into a hug and felt the slight tension in her body, the stiffness of someone who had learned to hide pain even in an embrace. "I'm fine, Mom," she whispered against my shoulder, and I nodded, even though neither of us believed it. That moment shattered me more than any words could, because it was clear she knew I had heard, and yet she was still defending him. I held her tighter, wishing I could transfer my strength into her bones. But strength wasn't enough. She was trapped in a cycle I couldn't break for her. All I could do was promise myself that I wouldn't stop trying. Once I left, I knew I couldn't sit idle any longer. I started reaching out to everyone in her orbit, old friends, coworkers, neighbors, anyone who might give me a glimpse into her life beyond his control. The answers were all the same. They hadn't seen her in months. Invitations went unanswered. Messages were ignored. Plans were canceled at the last minute. Piece by piece, a terrifying picture formed. He was cutting her off from the world entirely, and she was letting it happen. My daughter, once fiercely independent and full of light, had disappeared into his shadow. And the more I learned, the more I feared time was running out. Desperate, I sought help from a counselor who specialized in abusive relationships, laying everything bare. The insults, the isolation, the bruise, the silence. She listened quietly, then told me something I didn't want to hear. "You can't pull her out by force. If you do, she'll only run back to him. You must show her the truth slowly." The words were a bitter pill to swallow, but I knew she was right. My daughter was trapped in a cycle of manipulation, and the only way out was for her to see it for herself. So I changed my strategy. I stopped pushing, stopped accusing, and instead became a steady, patient presence. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, loving her from the sidelines while watching her suffer. Then came the call that confirmed my worst fears. "I quit my job," she told me cheerfully, as if it were her own decision. "He says it's time to focus on our future." My blood ran cold. Without her income, she was financially dependent on him, and that meant he controlled everything: her money, her choices, her life. I asked gentle questions, pretending to be curious rather than alarmed, and learned that all their accounts were now in his name. Every financial tie she had to independence was severed. He wasn't just isolating her emotionally. He was building a cage she couldn't afford to leave. And I knew then that if I didn't act soon, she might never escape. The call came one rainy evening, her voice trembling with joy and fear all at once. "I'm going to be a mother," she said, and I felt my knees buckle. My heart swelled at the thought of a grandchild, but beneath that warmth was pure terror. A child meant another tether to him, another reason for her to stay, another excuse for him to tighten his grip. I congratulated her, my voice steady even as dread clawed at my insides. She was overjoyed, dreaming aloud about nursery colors and baby names, oblivious to the storm she was standing in. And I knew that now more than ever I had to save her, not just for her sake, but for the tiny life she carried. It was 2 a.m. when the phone rang, her voice small and broken on the other end. "Mom, I don't feel safe," she whispered, and those 5 words froze the world around me. I asked where she was, if he was there, if I should call the police, but she wouldn't say, only that something had changed, that she was scared all the time. My heart pounded as I tried to keep my own fear out of my voice, promising her she could always come home, that I'd be waiting no matter what. But before I could ask more, she hung up. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. It was the sound of someone who finally saw the danger, but still felt trapped inside it. The next call wasn't from her. It was from the hospital. They said she had fallen down the stairs, that she was bruised but stable, and I was there within the hour. The doctor's eyes told me more than his words. He didn't believe the story, but without her admitting anything, his hands were tied. She looked fragile in that hospital bed, her skin pale, her smile forced as she assured me it was an accident. He was there too, hovering by her side, his arm around her shoulders like a protective husband, except I saw the flicker of control in his grip. I wanted to scream at him, to drag her out of that room and never look back. But I stayed silent because she wasn't ready yet. And until she was, I couldn't save her. After the hospital, I begged her to come home, my voice trembling with desperation as I reminded her of who she used to be before his shadow consumed her. She smiled weakly and insisted she was fine, that it was just a fall, that he was taking care of her, and that things were getting better. Every word was a dagger because I could hear the lie underneath, could see the fear flickering behind her eyes. I told her she didn't have to prove anything, that love shouldn't hurt, but she shook her head, clinging to the fantasy she'd built around him. "He loves me," she whispered, as if repeating it could make it true. That was the moment I realized I couldn't save her by pleading. Something drastic would have to happen, something undeniable. On my next visit, while he was distracted in another room, I slipped a tiny camera into the corner of their living room shelf, disguised as a decorative piece. My hands shook as I placed it, every second feeling like a countdown to discovery, but I knew I had no choice. Words alone wouldn't open her eyes. She needed to see the reality for herself. I left the apartment that day with my heart pounding, terrified of what the camera might capture, but more terrified of what might happen if I did nothing. For days I checked the footage in secret, each file heavier than the last. The truth was about to reveal itself in a way no one could deny, and I prayed I was strong enough to face it. When I finally watched the recordings, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, screaming at her for leaving a cup on the counter, his rage exploding over nothing. He hurled insults with venom, calling her worthless, lazy, disgusting, as she stood frozen, shrinking into herself. Then came the shattering sound of glass against the wall, inches from her head, and she flinched but didn't cry out. My chest tightened as I watched her clean up the mess in silence while he stormed off, unbothered. This wasn't a marriage. It was a war she was losing every day. I knew then that the evidence I held could no longer stay hidden. It was time to use it. The next clip was worse than anything before. He stood inches from her face, his breath heavy with rage, his voice low and poisonous. "If you ever leave me," he snarled, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The threat hung in the air like smoke, choking her into terrified silence. She didn't move, didn't breathe, as he stared her down like a predator cornering prey. I pressed pause, my hands trembling, tears streaking down my cheeks. This was no longer just abuse, it was a prison. And I swore then and there that I would tear down every wall he built around her, no matter the cost. One night, the camera captured the moment that broke me completely. He spat out the same vile insult I had heard before their wedding. "Who else would want a fat pig like you?" And I watched her crumble, sobbing quietly as he walked away without a glance. The words hit me like a physical blow because I knew how deeply they cut, how they had lived rent-free in her head all this time. This wasn't just cruelty. It was the deliberate destruction of her spirit. I had promised my husband I'd never let anyone break her, and now I was watching it happen in real time. Enough was enough. It was time to end this nightmare before it ended her. I contacted a lawyer the very next morning, laying out every piece of evidence I had collected. Every insult, every threat, every moment of terror. From there, I reached out to a women's shelter, where counselors explained the safest way to extract her without alerting him. The police were next, their advice measured but clear. If we moved carefully, we could protect her and the unborn baby. For the first time in months, I felt something close to control. I wasn't powerless anymore, I was preparing for war. Every detail mattered. Timing, location, safety. This was no longer just about love. It was about survival. I invited her to meet me for lunch under the pretense of celebrating her pregnancy, but when she arrived, I didn't waste a second. I showed her the footage. Every scream, every threat, every word meant to break her. She stared at the screen, silent at first, then trembling, then sobbing as the reality unfolded before her eyes. It was as if the illusion shattered in slow motion, each clip tearing down another lie she had been told. "Mom," she choked out. "I didn't know. I didn't want to believe." I held her hand as she cried, assuring her she wasn't weak, that this wasn't her fault. The truth had finally pierced the fog, and now she could no longer pretend. But even with the evidence burning into her memory, denial held its grip. "He's just stressed," she whispered between tears. "He loves me. He didn't mean it." I felt my chest tighten as she reached for excuses, desperate to rebuild the lie that had just collapsed. Victims often do, the counselor had warned me. It's part of the cycle. I didn't argue or lecture. I just listened, held her hand, and reminded her gently of what we both knew was real. I could see the cracks widening, her defenses faltering. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was only a matter of time before she said it aloud. A week later, she called me again, her voice steadier, more certain. "I can't raise a child in this," she said, and the weight of those words brought me to tears. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the tiny life growing inside her, innocent and deserving of safety. That thought pierced through the manipulation, through the fear, and lit a spark of courage I hadn't seen in her for years. "I want out," she whispered, "and I promise we'd make it happen." This was the turning point, the moment my daughter chose freedom over fear. And once that decision was made, there was no going back. Together, we crafted a plan as carefully as a military operation. We decided on a day when he'd be out of town for work, mapped out the safest routes, and prepared every document she'd need to start over. I coached her on how to pack without raising suspicion, what signs to watch for if he grew suspicious, and who to call if anything went wrong. Each step was precise, deliberate, and terrifying. But it was the first time she'd taken control in years. She still cried some nights, still questioned her strength, but the difference now was that she was moving forward. And I promised her that when the moment came, I would be waiting, ready to run with her into the light. In the final days before the escape, I kept a bag hidden in the trunk of my car, packed with clothes, important documents, cash, a burner phone, and everything she and the baby might need. I checked it every morning like a ritual, making sure nothing was missing, preparing for the moment she'd call. We agreed she couldn't keep anything packed at home. He noticed everything, even the smallest change. Her job was to act normal, while I played the waiting game, my heart pounding every time my phone buzzed. The bag was more than just survival. It was a symbol of freedom tucked beneath a blanket in my back seat. I didn't know when the moment would come, only that it would. And when it did, we had to be ready to vanish without a trace. It happened on a Thursday. He left for a business trip, just like he said he would. And the moment his car turned the corner, she called me. Her voice was shaking but firm. "Now," she said. I was already in the car, engine running, racing across town with tears in my eyes. When I pulled up to the curb, she stepped out with only one suitcase and a hand on her belly, her expression blank from holding everything in for too long. I didn't ask questions, I just opened the door. We drove away in silence, headlights cutting through the night, both of us terrified to breathe until the city disappeared in the rearview mirror. We drove through the night, not stopping until we reached the safe house 3 hours away, its plain exterior hiding the refuge inside. The counselor met us at the door, kind eyes and soft voice, ushering us into a space filled with warm blankets, quiet rooms, and safety. For the first time in what felt like forever, my daughter collapsed into bed and cried without holding back. She clutched her belly as the sobs racked her body, letting go of the months she had spent pretending everything was fine. I stayed by her side, brushing her hair back, whispering over and over, "You're safe now, baby. He can't hurt you anymore." That night, for the first time in a long time, we both slept. The next day, her phone lit up with call after call, 37 in total, each one more desperate than the last. First came the pleading voicemails, his voice dripping with false regret and promises of change. Then the threats followed, sharp and terrifying, promising he'd find her, that she'd pay for this. She didn't answer any of them, just stared at the screen with tears silently rolling down her face. I took the phone from her hands and turned it off, locking it in the counselor's drawer. "He doesn't get to reach you here," I said firmly. But I could still see the fear clinging to her shoulders like a shadow that hadn't yet let go. With the footage and messages in hand, we went to court 2 days later, filing for a restraining order under the protection of the shelter's legal team. My daughter sat beside me, her hands trembling as she signed the papers, her voice quiet but steady as she gave her testimony. I watched the judge read the evidence, watched his eyes harden as he saw the bruises, heard the threats, and listened to the calm horror of it all. The order was granted on the spot. He was legally forbidden to come near her now, and though a piece of paper couldn't erase months of fear, it was a shield we desperately needed. It was the first official line drawn between her and her abuser, and it felt like breathing for the first time. When the footage was handed to the police, everything changed. They brought him in for questioning, no longer able to look the other way now that the evidence was public and undeniable. His polished image cracked under pressure, the charming mask giving way to rage when confronted. Witnesses came forward, neighbors, a co-worker who had once overheard him yelling, a friend who noticed bruises but was too afraid to ask. The web he had spun began to unravel, and with every thread that snapped, the truth came into the light. My daughter didn't attend the interrogation. She didn't have to. The proof spoke louder than she ever could. We sat together in the shelter's office as she signed the divorce papers, her hand shaking but her jaw set with quiet resolve. It wasn't just a legal form. It was a declaration of freedom, the final step in severing the bond that had nearly destroyed her. She didn't cry this time. She didn't falter. She looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "I'm ready." I kissed her forehead and told her how proud I was, how brave she had become, and how much I loved her. No ceremony, no fanfare, just a pen, a paper, and the end of a nightmare. Sometimes survival is the loudest form of triumph. He didn't take the divorce quietly. He launched smear campaigns online, spreading lies about her, twisting the narrative to paint himself as the victim. He sent emails to her former co-workers, posted cruel messages on social media, even tried to contact distant relatives with fabricated stories. But every move he made only proved the case further. His instability, his need for control. The lawyer collected everything, and each attack became more ammunition. People saw through the act quickly, and while his rage boiled in public, my daughter stayed silent, steady, and untouchable. The more he screamed, the more obvious his guilt became. Through every court date, every meeting, every sleepless night, I never left her side. I sat in the front row at every hearing, held her hand in every waiting room, and reminded her, again and again, that she wasn't alone. She was stronger than she'd ever known. But strength doesn't mean you have to walk through fire without anyone beside you. I was there when she testified. I was there when she cried. And I was there when she looked her abuser in the eyes and didn't flinch. Being her mother had always been my greatest role. But now I understood the full weight of what it meant to fight for your child's life. He tried to fight for custody, claiming the baby was his chance to start over. But the court had seen too much. The footage, the threats, the reports from the shelter and the doctors, all of it painted a clear picture of danger. My daughter stood firm, her voice calm and unwavering as she told the judge what she wanted: full custody and complete legal protection. The court ruled in her favor without hesitation. He was granted no visitation, no rights, no access. The judge's words were final. And when the gavel came down, I saw something flicker in my daughter's eyes. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. When the final trial came, the courtroom was packed. Every eye watching the man who once thought he was untouchable. The prosecutor played the footage, read the transcripts, showed the bruises, and let the truth bleed through every word. He didn't look at anyone. Not at the judge, not at my daughter, not even at me. His charm was gone, replaced by cold silence and the occasional twitch of his jaw as the evidence stacked higher and higher. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Domestic abuse, threats, and harassment. When the sentence was read, 5 years in prison, my daughter exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath for an eternity. Justice had finally spoken. Even after the trial, healing didn't happen overnight. My daughter spent months in therapy, untangling the knots of control and fear he had planted in her mind. She questioned everything: her judgment, her worth, her ability to trust again. Some days she barely spoke. Other days she talked for hours, finally letting the poison leave her in words. There were nightmares, flashbacks, guilt she didn't deserve to carry. But slowly, layer by layer, she began to rebuild herself. Not into who she used to be, but into someone stronger. Survival wasn't the end. It was the beginning of becoming whole again. One morning I found her in the kitchen, humming softly as she made tea, sunlight brushing her face through the window. She turned to me wearing no makeup, her hair still messy from sleep, and said, "I looked in the mirror today and didn't hate what I saw. It hit me harder than I expected." This tiny, casual sentence held more power than any courtroom victory. Her smile wasn't for show. It was real, quiet, and full of something I hadn't seen in years: self-acceptance. I nodded, holding back tears, knowing this moment was sacred. After everything he tried to destroy, she was learning to love herself again. And no one could take that away from her. With time, she found purpose again. Took a job at a local art center, the same kind of creative space she used to dream about. The hours were long, but her eyes lit up when she talked about the projects, the people, the freedom. She started smiling more, laughing louder, reconnecting with friends one call at a time. The shadows hadn't disappeared, but they no longer dictated her days. Every paycheck she earned felt like a reclamation of her independence. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building a new life, one rooted in truth, strength, and joy. And I saw finally the fire return to her soul. When the baby arrived, a beautiful girl with dark hair and eyes full of curiosity, it felt like the world had come full circle. She held her daughter close, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, whispering promises I knew she meant with every breath. You'll never feel what I felt. I'll protect you." I watched her cradle that child with a love so fierce, it felt like armor. The hospital room was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred, and for the first time in years, I saw hope blooming without fear. That baby wasn't just new life. She was proof that healing was possible. And as I held my granddaughter for the first time, I felt something shift. The cycle was broken. Months later, a letter arrived from prison, his handwriting unmistakable, each word drenched in hollow regret. He begged for forgiveness, claimed he'd changed, said he had time to reflect and wanted to be a better man for his daughter. My daughter read it in silence, no tears, no tremble, just calm observation. When she finished, she folded it once and placed it in the trash without a single word. She didn't need closure from him. He no longer held that kind of power. His words, once used as weapons, had finally lost their sting. She had moved on, and he would remain behind, trapped in a world he built for himself. A journalist who followed the trial reached out, asking if she'd be willing to share her story, to help others, to raise awareness, to speak for women still trapped. First, she hesitated. The thought of reliving everything was suffocating. But eventually she said yes, not for him, not even for herself, but for the women who hadn't escaped yet. Writing became cathartic, painful but necessary. Her story turned into a manuscript, then a book deal, then a movement. She bared her soul on the page so others wouldn't feel alone in their silence. And when she saw her name on the cover for the first time, she smiled. Not because of fame, but because her voice had finally found its power. The interviews came quickly. Talk shows, podcasts, panel discussions, all asking how she found the courage to leave, to fight, to speak. Her voice was steady, her story consistent, her message always the same. It starts with believing you deserve more. Thousands wrote in thanking her, sharing their own stories, finding the strength to walk away. She didn't pretend to be perfect or healed beyond pain. She was honest about the hard days, the guilt, the fear. But her presence became a lighthouse for others drowning in silence. The media tried to shape her into a symbol. She reminded them she was still a person, one who fought like hell to survive. Years later, we were walking through a park, my daughter, her daughter, and I, when I saw him. He was stepping out of a halfway house across the street, thinner, older, eyes dull with bitterness. He looked at her but didn't approach, maybe too ashamed, maybe afraid of what she'd say, or what she wouldn't. She saw him too. Her grip on the stroller tightened for a second, but then she exhaled, stood tall, and kept walking without a word. No panic, no tears. Just strength. He faded behind us like a forgotten shadow, while she walked forward into a life he no longer touched. That silence was the loudest victory. That night, after the encounter, she told me something I'll never forget. I used to dream about that moment, what I'd say, how I'd scream at him or cry. But when I saw him, I felt nothing. Just done. Her voice was calm, free of tremors, grounded in truth. She had moved beyond fear, beyond rage, beyond needing revenge. She had reclaimed her peace, and in doing so, stripped him of all remaining power. The past no longer haunted her. It informed her, strengthened her, but no longer owned her. And as I watched her tuck her daughter into bed with a kiss and a smile, I knew it for certain. She was free. Truly, finally free. What began as a single conversation over coffee turned into something much bigger. She started a weekly support group for women rebuilding their lives after abuse. At first, it was held in the back room of the community center. Just 5 women sitting in a circle, sharing stories through tears and trembling voices. But word spread quickly. More women came, and with them came hope, strength, and the quiet comfort of being understood. She listened to every voice, never offering pity. Only truth, empathy, and her own experience. She wasn't a savior, just a survivor helping others stand. And somehow, in helping them heal, she found even deeper healing in herself. I sat in the front row of a packed auditorium, Watching my daughter stand before hundreds as the keynote speaker at a national conference on domestic violence awareness. Her voice was clear and firm, filled with compassion and fire, as she spoke not just of pain but of power. The power to break cycles, to find yourself again, to rise. The room hung on every word, some crying quietly, others nodding, all of them moved. I watched her in awe, no longer seeing the broken girl who once clung to excuses, but a woman fully in control of her voice, her body, her future. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness but from pride that overflowed. My daughter had become a lighthouse, and I was honored just to witness her shine. During a Q&A, someone asked what moment pushed her to leave, and she didn't hesitate. "He called me a fat pig," she said plainly, and the room fell into stunned silence. That wasn't the worst thing he ever said, but it was the first time I believed he didn't love me. The first time I looked at myself and felt shame that wasn't mine to carry. Her voice didn't crack. She stood tall in that truth, and the audience responded with thunderous applause. That one insult, meant to belittle her, had become the spark of her rebellion, and now it was the anthem of her strength. The very insult that once broke her now fueling her mission to lift others. Years later, he was released from prison, but the world he returned to was not the one he left. He lived in quiet obscurity, no job, no reputation, a ghost in a town that had moved on without him. My daughter never checked in on him, never asked, never needed closure, because she already had it. She was thriving, raising her daughter with joy and wisdom, surrounded by friends, clients, and a community that admired her resilience. The circle had closed not with vengeance but with peace. He had mocked her, dismissed her, tried to own her, and now he was forgotten. But she was unforgettable. She once told me healing doesn't happen all at once. It's found in the little moments. Waking up without dread, laughing without guilt, looking in the mirror without shame. Each scar told a story, not of pain but of endurance, of lessons carved into skin and spirit. The therapy sessions, the support groups, the writing, the speaking, they all helped. But real healing came the day she realized she didn't need to be the woman she was before. She could be someone new, someone wiser, stronger, kinder. Not despite the pain, but because she survived it. That was the power of healing. Not erasing the past, but using it to fuel a future worth living. She didn't expect it, didn't go looking for it, but it found her anyway. A quiet, gentle man who saw her, listened to her, and never tried to dim her light. He wasn't flashy or overly charming. He was patient, honest, and consistent, and for a long time that felt foreign to her. She tested his words, waited for cracks, but they never came. Slowly, she let him in, not to fix her, but to walk beside her. He knew her story, and still, he held her hand with tenderness, never needing her to be anything but herself. It wasn't fairy tale love. It was real love, the kind that grows roots and gives, not takes. On her wedding day, the second one, the real one, there was no grand ballroom, no forced smiles, no hollow vows. Just a garden, friends, laughter, and a daughter who carried petals in a basket with pride. When it was my turn to speak, I raised my glass, my voice thick with tears. "This," I said, looking at the man beside her, "this is love. Gentle, true, and earned." My daughter met my eyes, and in hers I saw everything: pain, triumph, peace. We had survived the storm together. And now, in that quiet afternoon light, we were celebrating the sun that followed. Love had finally come home.